Hello and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold, and as always, I'm joined by Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report. Chris, thank you for doing this with me time and time and time again. I really appreciate it, and so do all of our listeners.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
It was a busy past week in baseball. A lot of things happened. There were several deadlines that we have to touch on. First and foremost, Gleyber Torres, Tigers second baseman. He accepted the 1-year, $22.025 million qualifying offer, returning to the Tigers in the 2026 season. 13 players were tendered 1-year, $22.025 million qualifying offers for the 2026 season. Surprisingly, 4 of them accepted. Tigers second baseman Gleyber Torres, Milwaukee Brewers right-hander Brandon Woodruff, Chicago Cubs left-hander Shota Imanaga, and New York Yankees center fielder Trent Grisham. Those players are returning to those teams for 2026, including Gleyber Torres to the Tigers. The other 9 players declined the qualifying offer in favor of free agency. Kyle Schwarber, Kyle Tucker, Ranger Suarez, Framber Valdez, Bo Bichette, Dylan Cease, Edwin Diaz, Zach Gallen, and Michael King. I think the Tigers wanted the draft pick here. And remember, here's how this works. Had Torres declined, the Tigers would have received a draft pick between the first round and competitive balance round A if he signed for at least $50 million. Or a draft pick between competitive balance round B and the third round if he signed for less than $50 million. When the Tigers signed Gleyber Torres initially for 1 year, $15 million, the Tigers were planning on giving him the qualifying offer to secure a draft pick. But instead, Gleyber Torres accepts the qualifying offer, which means the Tigers won't get a coveted draft pick in this case. Instead, the Tigers get another year of Gleyber Torres for $22 million, which is a $7 million raise from last season because he accepted the qualifying offer for this upcoming season. And it's rare for players to accept these. Before this offseason, only 14 of 144 players had accepted the qualifying offer since the system was implemented in 2012. That's less than 10%. This offseason, 4 of 13 players accepted it. That's more than 30%. Were you surprised by Gleyber Torres' decision to accept the qualifying offer, come back to the Tigers for just more than $22 million in 2026? And what's your reaction to him rejoining this team for another season?
I wasn't surprised he picked it. I think it's the right decision for him. He wasn't going to get $20 million from anybody else probably. And he probably was not going to get, a very long deal, anything more than 3 years or whatever. So it made sense for him. I also think there's just kind of this looming cloud of a work stoppage after 2026 that I think hangs over a lot of these guys. And for some of them, this is their chance to get a pretty legitimate payday. I mean, $20 million, $22 million is nothing to sneeze at. With Torres, he's still relatively young, so he can go out there and get the deal he wants. I do think you're right. The Tigers probably would have preferred to get the draft pick there, but I don't think they're like disappointed. I think if they did not want to have him back, I don't think they would have extended the qualifying offer. So I think they're okay with him coming back at least. And it does kind of inform the rest of their offseason a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it made sense on his part. And, I don't think the Tigers were like banging their heads against the wall after it. I just think that, they got to reconfigure some things.
The Tigers also protected 5 prospects from the Rule 5 draft. Utility player Trei Cruz, second baseman, third baseman Hao-Yu Lee, left-hander Jake Miller, catcher Thayron Liranzo, and catcher/first baseman Eduardo Valencia. We'll have more on these players later in the show with special guest Rogelio Castillo from Tigers Minor League Report. We also had another deadline where the Tigers had 12 arbitration-eligible players. The Tigers non-tendered Andy Ibáñez into free agency, so Andy Ibáñez will not return to the Tigers in 2026. But the Tigers tendered contracts to the other 11 players, meaning they will return to the Tigers in 2026. Tarik Skubal, Casey Mize, Jake Rogers, Will Vest, Zach McKinstry, Matt Vierling, Riley Green, Spencer Torkelson, Kerry Carpenter, Beau Brieske, and Tyler Holton. We also saw the Tigers avoid arbitration, which is the next step in the process for those 11 players who have been tendered contracts, with Matt Vierling for $3.255 million, Jake Rogers for $3.05 million, and Beau Brieske for $1.1575 million. The Tigers have to avoid arbitration with the other 8 players by January 8th. But how do we feel about the Tigers committing to Matt Vierling, Jake Rogers, and Beau Brieske in 2026? All 3 of those are fully guaranteed contracts.
I mean, this feels as much about vibes as it does about like talent, the actual players. I think we've talked about Jake Rogers a little bit before and how I think there's a little bit of disconnect among fans because they just kind of look at the lack of offensive production. But as a backup catcher, he's kind of ideal. And we talked about it before, he didn't raise a stink when he lost his job, and he's continued to be a great team player and a good defender. And that's the key. If you're a backup catcher, you want him to do something really well, and he does. With Vierling, I thought there was a slight chance that they might non-tender him, but this is a guy, 2025 was a real bummer for him. He just could not get healthy. He's 1 year removed from legitimately being their second best offensive regular. Kerry Carpenter was better, but didn't play a full season, in 2024. And, he just gives them more options. It's not like, I don't know if there's a clear path to playing time for him, but, and if everybody's healthy, then, maybe he doesn't play a ton, but you can't count on everybody being healthy, and he gives you just more options. He's a solid player, and I believe he still has a minor league option. So just in case something goes wrong, he can still go to Toledo. And Brieske, I feel like, is kind of like the pitching equivalent of Vierling. This is a guy who was a huge part of your bullpen 2 years ago. Last year was kind of a disaster and he was hurt. But, when he's healthy, it's a big fastball and a really interesting changeup. And he's a guy who could pitch anywhere from like the 5th to the 9th inning for you in any given game. He started games, for them when they were doing pitching chaos. So he's it for what, 1.5 million, you said? It's a pretty low price to pay for a guy who could potentially be a real key, a piece to your bullpen.
A lot of thoughts on all 3 of those players, but yes, Matt Vierling does have one minor league option remaining, and the Tigers haven't shied away from paying guys significant money and sticking them in AAA Toledo as depth. We saw them do that with Akil Baddoo for 2 seasons, actually. So we could see them do the same thing with Matt Vierling because you're spot on. He does have the one minor league option remaining. That's very fascinating. Jake Rogers, he's a good backup catcher, and this locks in Dylan Dingler and Jake Rogers as the tandem at the catcher position for 2026. We can expect the 3rd string catcher to be Tomas Nido, who re-signed with the Tigers on a minor league contract. Jake Rogers, we all know how it went down. He starts the season as starting catcher, left oblique injury. That's in early April, sidelines him for 6 weeks. And during that time frame, Dylan Dingler takes over as starting catcher, never looks back, and Jake Rogers gets pushed to the backup role. But this is a true team first player, a true glue guy, a true leader in the clubhouse. Like, there's not a lot to like about the offense. He runs into some home runs every once in a while, but it's about the leadership behind the scenes. It's about the team first player, the glue guy, and then the defense. Like, he is the definition of a backup catcher, and the defense is above average. It's really good. And after this year, he's going to have 6 years of MLB service time. I think if he can just hit a little bit more, he could get to that elusive 10 years of service time if he just hits a little bit more, because he can make a career out of being a backup catcher here. This is a good backup catcher. For $3 million, it's an easy decision to bring Jake Rogers back for 2026. For Matt Vierling, my big question is, where will he play? Is he your everyday right fielder, which would shift Kerry Carpenter to everyday designated hitter, Colt Keith to everyday third baseman? Is he the replacement for Andy Ibáñez, playing only against lefties, both at third base and at all 3 outfield positions and getting those big pinch hit opportunities? And then regardless of the role, who doesn't make the roster because of Matt Vierling? Is it Hao-Yu Lee? Is it Trei Cruz? Is it Trey Sweeney? Is it Justin Henry Malloy? Do we think Matt Vierling is better than all 4 of those players? Maybe. If he is, would the Tigers really carry Wenzel Perez, Jahmai Jones, and Matt Vierling, 3 primary outfielders who maybe aren't everyday players on their roster? I don't think that makes a ton of sense. So Matt Vierling, he has shown that he can be, and I believe he can be in the future, an important piece of the Tigers, because when healthy, he's performed. He has hit above 250 with at least a 700 OPS, playing more than 130 games when he's healthy. That's great production for who he is, but he was limited to 31 games in 2025. He had the shoulder injury, then the oblique injury, and even when he was on the field, he just wasn't productive. He's below average at third base. So even if he gets pinch hit at bats late in games against lefty pitchers, are you confident putting him at third base late in the game? Maybe, but maybe not. He is above average at all three outfield positions, so I think there's some big value there. I don't know. I'm interested to see what he looks like when we get into spring training games and then how he fits onto the roster. I certainly don't think it's a bad thing that the Tigers are keeping him around for $3 million, but I just want to see how the roster is configured. And maybe Matt Vierling is the new Andy Ibáñez and Jahmai Jones, replacing both players. And the Tigers acquire someone who is a true everyday player, either in the outfield or at third base. Yes, that's one less chess piece for manager AJ Hinch to play with, but it gets him closer to a set it and forget it type of lineup that he had when he was in Houston managing the Astros. And it would make Matt Vierling the sole off the bench weapon as a right-handed hitter against left-handed pitchers. Again, I'm interested to see how Matt Vierling fits here once we get into spring training. For Beau Brieske, that was a small surprise for me. Like, yes, it's only $1 million, but it's also Beau Brieske. Like, he's 27. He's never been able to develop a legit slider, so his fastball changeup. He walks too many batters. He got demoted to AAA Toledo for performance reasons, and then he had the right forearm strain that affected his elbow. So seemingly he is healthy, but he had some setbacks along the way. We'll see how he does when he shows up to spring training. It wasn't good when he was with the Tigers. It was a 6.55 ERA in 22 innings with 12 walks and 16 strikeouts. I wouldn't have been surprised if the Tigers just decided to cut him and part ways. I'm not sure he's going to become a reliable high leverage reliever. I think he maybe has value as a low leverage reliever and a mid leverage reliever, but I don't think he's someone you're confident giving the ball to in the big moments unless he develops a slider as a true weapon. And I'd prefer the Tigers bullpen not to be a development camp again in 2026. So I love Beau Brieske as a competitor. I love him as a person. I love him as a developmental success story. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm worried that he might hurt the Tigers more than he helps the Tigers in 2026. All right, let's get into the big two. Question one of the big two. How does Gleyber Torres accepting the qualifying offer impact the rest of the Tigers offseason? What is the projected infield with Gleyber Torres at second base? And how does Gleyber Torres returning impact top prospect Kevin McGonigle?
I think it has a pretty substantial impact. Honestly, I don't know if it's going to keep them from pursuing another infielder like Alex Bregman or maybe Vahasa Kim or whatever. I don't think they're going to go after Bichette, but who knows? But I do think that they did this knowing that they didn't want to get caught without at least one solid bat in the offseason. And if you treat Torres like a free agent, they were happy, I think, with the production they got from him last year, at least in the first half. And you're not going to probably get a player like that certainly not for a 1-year deal in free agency. So I think they took it as we said, maybe they preferred the draft pick, but I think they're not too upset about him coming back. But it definitely means that Kevin McGonigle is not going to be your opening day second baseman. Now, McGonigle could still theoretically win the job at shortstop or third base. If he goes out there and has a monster spring training and looks like a viable shortstop or looks like a great third baseman, like he may just force his way into the roster. But it does give him one less outlet to do that. And again, it takes away $22 million the Tigers might be able to spend on somebody, whether it's an offensive player or in the bullpen or the starting pitching rotation. So yeah, it has a pretty big impact, but ultimately, I do think it's probably a good impact.
You mentioned $22 million. For me, it's about Gleyber Torres, Jack Flaherty, and the 11 arbitration-eligible players. It's not just Gleyber Torres who impacts the rest of the Tigers' offseason. It's the combination of those three parts. For Gleyber Torres in the qualifying offer, it's $22 million. For Jack Flaherty in the player option, it's $20 million. That's $42 million that I don't think the Tigers expected to have on their payroll. I know some people with the Tigers were surprised at both outcomes there, with Jack Flaherty accepting the player option, Gleyber Torres accepting the qualifying offer. And then you have an estimated $54 million for the 11 arbitration eligible players. So that's $96 million between Jack Flaherty, Gleyber Torres, and the 11 arbitration-eligible players. You also have guaranteed contracts with Javier Baez for $24 million and Colt Keith for $4.33 million. So that's $124 million total. And then you have roughly $15 million for the pre-arbitration players, which is everybody making the MLB minimum salary. So that's about $140 million for the 2026 payroll. The 2026 opening day payroll is currently at $140 million. It was at $143 million in 2025, which ranks 17th among the 30 MLB teams. So to go back to the question, yes, the $22 million for Gleyber Torres definitely impacts the rest of the offseason plans, but so does the $20 million for Jack Flaherty. I mean, without those two players, the Tigers would be at $100 million right now for their 2026 payroll. That gives them probably an extra $75 million to add to the payroll if the maximum is $170 million, which is what it would have been in 2025 had the Tigers signed Alex Bregman. So had the Tigers signed Alex Bregman, their payroll for 2025 on opening day would have been around $170, as opposed to 140. But with Gleyber Torres and Jack Flaherty, the Tigers are sitting at 140 million. So if the limit is 170, somewhere in that range, that gives you only 30 million to add to the payroll for 2026, which again, like, I don't know if that's exactly what the Tigers would have wanted. Like, I think when you look at this, it's the difference between adding 75 million and adding 30 million, getting Jack Flaherty and Gleyber Torres back. The question that I have for the Tigers is, would they rather have 75 million to spend and 2 draft picks, or would you rather have Jack Flaherty and Gleyber Torres? And I think that is an easy answer. And so if the Tigers are disappointed with Jack Flaherty for accepting his player option and Gleyber Torres for accepting the qualifying offer, I would certainly understand that when you consider it could have been adding 75 million to the payroll and getting 2 draft picks. As for where we go from here, 2026 payroll right now is at 140 million. And if the maximum is somewhere around 170, then find a way to add 30 million in free agency and trades. That's not a lot of money to work with in this market. So I think the Gleyber Torres, the Jack Flaherty decisions, both of those, not just one, but both of them really do impact what the Tigers are going to do the rest of the way. I don't foresee Alex Bregman signing with the Tigers. I know he's out there in free agency, and yes, the Tigers may kick the tires, but to me, like, Spencer Torkelson at first base, Gleyber Torres at second base, Hao-Yu Lee at shortstop, and Cole Keith at third base. Like, that seems pretty set in stone until we hear otherwise. I think the bigger question is about designated hitter in right field. If Kerry Carpenter is the everyday DH, to keep him healthy, then the Tigers would be wise to upgrade with a power bat to play right field. I don't foresee the Tigers chasing a power bat like Kyle Schwarber to be the everyday designated hitter for the next 4 years, only because the Tigers have too many designated hitter / first baseman type players in their organization. I mean, even Riley Green, the way that he's running these days, like maybe, and playing defense, maybe he's best suited for first base down the road, a position he played for Team USA growing up. But that's a problem that will eventually catch up to the Tigers, having too many of those DH first base type players. So let's not lock in a DH only player like Kyle Schwarber for the next 4 years. Maybe you look towards upgrading by adding a power hitting right fielder. That could be an option for the Tigers. Either way, I think the infield's pretty much set. I do think there is a world in which Javi Baez plays shortstop against right-handed pitchers and center field against left-handed pitchers, which means Parker Meadows wouldn't have to play against lefties. If that happens, then maybe the Tigers would need someone to play shortstop against lefties. Think Ahmed Rosario, maybe even Ramon Urias, but that's just a cheap platoon player. As for legit upgrades, if it's not Bregman, I don't think there will be any upgrades to the infield. And even Bregman, like I said, is feeling more and more like a long shot when you consider how the roster is going to be constructed. And obviously a trade could change anything and everything. But as for Kevin McGonigle, Tigers general manager Jeff Greenberg, he implied like in every way possible that McGonigle won't make the 2026 opening day roster, even though the Tigers expect him to debut at some point in the 2026 season. And he said all that before Gleyber Torres made his decision to accept the qualifying offer. So I think the Tigers want McGonigle to play in AAA Toledo before he makes his debut. I don't think the Gleyber Torres decision really impacts McGonigle at all. I'm also speaking to some evaluators recently. I've received Beau Brieske defensive comps as the ceiling for Kevin McGonigle at shortstop. Now, Beau Brieske has been worth -19 defensive runs saved at shortstop in his 7-year MLB career, but he has played more than 6,000 innings at shortstop. So if that's Kevin McGonigle's ceiling is like 6,000 innings at shortstop over 7 years in the big leagues, like I'm going to take that all day long. Even if it's not great, it's going to be serviceable. And that's a positive in the short term, especially because Bryce Rayner is going to come along and push McGonigle to second base or third base in a couple of years. So no, I do not think the Gleyber Torres decision impacts Kevin McGonigle because I don't think Kevin McGonigle was ever going to make the opening day roster. I expect him to make his MLB debut more in that mid to late August range if he's not up within the first 2 weeks of the season. Not only would that preserve his rookie eligibility for 2027, but it would also shift the Tigers' eligibility for the prospect promotion incentive to 2027. So a lot to unpack there, but not great for the payroll. Don't think it really makes a difference for Kevin McGonigle. And it seems like the infield is set. Let's get to question 2 of the big 2. There were 66 players non-tendered, including Andy Ibáñez, which means there are 66 new free agents. Should the Tigers try to sign any of them? Let's not forget, last offseason, Kyle Finnegan was non-tendered by the Washington Nationals, and he turned out to be a very important piece to the Tigers, not as a free agent addition, but as a trade addition in 2025. 66 new free agents, anyone the Tigers should be going after.
Teams don't normally get rid of guys who are good. Now, you did mention Kyle Finnegan, and it does happen sometimes where guys get non-tendered, re-sign, and there's some talent out there. But there's some interesting names. I'll say that. A lot of it comes down to health. Some of the names that dug into more are all guys who are coming off some pretty severe arm injuries. But I went and I looked at just some familiar names here. Tommy Henry is a guy that people might have talked about because he was the ace of Michigan's College World Series runner-up team with Chris Fetter as their pitching coach. So, there may be some familiarity there, but he's hurt. He's out for the entire year. I don't know why you do that, but it's a name. So there are a couple Dodgers pitchers who are interesting, Nick Frasso and Evan Phillips. Frasso is a really super athletic guy who used to play basketball and has a ton of extension, but he's another guy who was hurt a bunch. And this year he went on the IL at the end of the season for reasons that were never fully explained. So that doesn't help. And then, Sam Hentges is an interesting guy. He was really good for the Guardians for several years. He had a rough, rookie year, but the next 2.5 years were good. Didn't pitch at all last year, and he had a shoulder, like a torn labrum. So that makes me a little bit wary. But when he was healthy, it's a big, intimidating 6'8" lefty with a mid-90s fastball, a couple of good breaking balls. He'd be an interesting, guy to target if you believe the medicals are right. And Colin Holderman, I'm throwing out these random relievers, right? Colin Holderman is a guy who throws in the upper 90s. Not a whole lot there, but looks like he started experimenting with a splitter this year with the Pirates. And, that always perks my ears up a little bit because the Tigers seem to love splitter guys. And maybe they see something there that they can work with. And then the last name I'll mention is Carson Ragsdale, who's another big 6'8" relief pitcher. Hasn't done much of anything in the big leagues, but another guy with a lot of extension. That kind of tends to happen when you're almost 7 feet tall. But he was also a guy that was once upon a time traded by Scott Harris when he was with the Giants. So maybe he liked something about him once back in the day and still does. So that's another name that's out there. But really, nobody that jumps off the page at like, hey, go get that guy.
How about some of the bigger names? Can I interest you in Adolis Garcia? A power hitting outfielder. He's 32 years old, non-tendered by the Texas Rangers. And I get it. Adolis Garcia is not worth $12 million, which is what they would have had to pay him had they gone through the arbitration process. Adolis Garcia is going to play for a big league team in 2026. There's no question about it. This is a 2-time All-Star in his 7-year MLB career. And he's coming off a really rough season. There's no question about it, but he almost touched 20 home runs. He's got a ton of power. Yes, the strikeouts are high, the walks are low, but he continues to hit the ball extremely hard. And defensively, he's not a bad right fielder. He's an above average right fielder. He's got a really strong arm. And if the Tigers want to go get that right-handed power bat in the outfield, which would allow Kerry Carpenter to be the everyday's designated hitter, Wenzel Perez, a switch hitter, to move into a bench role. Maybe Adolis Garcia could be a low-cost option. No, he would not help the Tigers solve their strikeout problem. But at the same time, from 2021 to 23, Adolis Garcia produced 10.6 F-WAR, ranking 40th among 226 qualified hitters. So he has a track record. He still hits the ball extremely hard, but the strikeouts are high, the walks are low. Can I interest you in Adolis Garcia?
I would not hate that on if you can get him to, a spring training invite kind of deal. But the one thing about him is that he's never, for all that power and being right-handed, he's never done particularly well against lefties. Like, he's been fine, but he's actually been better than right-handed pitching or against right-handed pitching in his career. So it's not like that lefty masher that you want. But again, like you said, the power's there. He was, an exciting player just 3-4 years ago. But yeah, it's been a rough couple seasons, and you'd have to believe in your hitting coaches and feel like you could rehabilitate something there because, as you said, it's not a super patient guy. Power's power. So if you believe in it, sure.
What about Christopher Morel, an outfielder from the Tampa Bay Rays, non-tendered by the Rays? He was projected for $2.6 million in the arbitration process. He probably has more upside than any non-tendered player. This is a guy who turns 27 in late June, so he's really young. He topped 20 home runs in 2 of his first 4 big league seasons. But the weaknesses, it's too many whiffs and it's below average defense. The strengths, it's big power and a solid walk rate. To me, he needs to make more contact if he wants to reach his ceiling, but he makes decent swing decisions. He's got elite bat speed, draws enough walks. That allows him to remain dangerous. And if it works out, he's got 3 years of team control remaining. The Tigers like to unlock the upside in players, but this really does seem like maybe a Scott Harris year 1 type of addition as opposed to like where we are now, like with the Tigers being back-to-back in the ALDS, trying to make it further, get to the ALCS, try to win a World Series in the last year of Tarek Skubal. But if a guy like Christopher Morel puts it all together, he could become an all-star in the future. I don't think there's any question about that just based on raw talent alone. Do you think he could even be an option for the Tigers, or do you think he is a better fit for a rebuilding team like maybe the Tigers were in year one of Scott Harris, where they're trying to find additional pieces to be part of the long-term plan?
Yeah, he doesn't necessarily feel like a fit to me because of the strikeouts are awfully high and the average has always been really low. And, like the tools they're interesting. He's another guy with a kind of random reverse platoon splits for whatever reason. But yeah, he feels more like somebody that a team like the White Sox could take a chance on. Right. Like we're not quite there yet. See if you can get a guy with some upside. He's what was Klay Thompson's brother's name? He would occasionally show up, or Trace Thompson. He would randomly have like a good half a season for some team and feel like, we unlocked something. And then 2 months later, he's back in AAA. So it feels like that kind of player to me.
How about Alek Manoah, a right-hander who somehow ended up with the Atlanta Braves and was non-tendered by the Braves? He was only projected for $2.2 million in the arbitration process. I could see him signing a minor league contract. Do you like Alek Manoah on a minor league deal if it comes to that? It's easy to forget. Like, this guy was an all-star in 2022. But he didn't pitch in the big leagues last season. He was in the minor leagues for all of 2025, coming back from Tommy John surgery. He had, at his peak, a near Cy Young winning season in 2022. He finished third behind Justin Verlander and Dylan Cease. I think there's still talent in there when you look at the fact that like the slider at the AAA level is missing bats at a near 40% rate. But at the same time, the fastball is a few ticks down. That's a little bit concerning. And then when you look at where he went after the 2022 season, it was underperformance in 2023. Tommy John surgery in 2024, and he hasn't fully rebounded in 2025. The Tigers like to fix pitchers, and if there is somebody who has upside that they could try to unlock and fix, maybe Alek Manoah could be that guy, because he was an all-star in 2022. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball. And if there is an organization that maybe could get him on track, you'd think maybe it could be the Tigers in a situation where Alek Manoah may need the Tigers more than the Tigers need Alek Manoah. But if it is just a minor league contract, is that somebody you like to see the Tigers take a flyer on, or are you done with Alek Manoah?
So one of the things I do in my capacity at Tigers Minor League Report is watch a lot of minor league baseball. And I actually got to see Manoah's first start back in 2024 from his injury was against the Lakeland Flying Tigers, and it was an absolute disaster. He could not throw strikes to save his life. And that seemed to continue basically for the rest of that season. And then even beginning in 2025, his first outing was against the Florida Complex League Tigers. And he again struggled against these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who don't have any MLB future at all. He could not get them out. And, I know he got back up to AAA toward the end of the year, and he is a name, and he did have a lot of success at one point, but the times I watched him, he just did not look like a big league pitcher anymore. The strikes weren't there. The stuff was really iffy. If you think you can, and it's something that's been an issue with him throughout his career, was like the conditioning might be a problem. He's just always been a big dude. Do you think you can get him on track? Sure. The arm talent might still be there, but he just looks like he was cooked to me.
Those are the big names. I do like the Evan Phillips reference, right-handed reliever, non-tendered by the Los Angeles Dodgers. I wouldn't be surprised if the Dodgers bring back Phillips for less than his projected $6 million salary. But if a reunion does not happen there, I would love to see the Tigers, and I'm sure other teams would want to do the same, offering a one-year deal for 2026 with a player option for 2027. Because he underwent Tommy John surgery in early June, he should be back at some point in 2026, but not until after the All-Star game. I do like what he could bring. I think it's the 30% strikeout rate from 2021 to 2024. That definitely intrigues me, especially with a walk rate that's below 7% in that time frame. So when you combine a less than 7% walk rate with a near 30% strikeout rate, I'm going to sign up for that. I like the sweeper fastball combination. It really does miss bats. That is something the Tigers desperately need in their bullpen. So Evan Phillips, I think, is definitely a name to watch. He was non-tendered by the Dodgers and could be a good fit for the Tigers. Okay, we're going to take a break, but when we return, we're joined by Rogelio Castillo from Tigers Minor League Report to talk about some prospects in the news this past week. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Rogelio Castillo from Tigers Minor League Report to the Days of Roar podcast. He has been here before, and we are lucky to have him on the show once again. Raj, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right, so let's jump right into it. The Tigers protected 5 prospects from the Rule 5 draft by adding them to the 40-man roster. The Rule 5 draft is in December, but the deadline to protect these draft-eligible players was this past Tuesday. So on that day, the Tigers protected Trei Cruz, Hao-Yu Lee, Jake Miller, Thayron Liranzo, and Eduardo Valencia. We'll get into each player, but before we do that, Raj, what are your general thoughts on the Tigers choosing to protect these 5 players?
I thought it was really progressive in the sense that they are not trying to just continuously flip, kind of keep on a tab on 4A players. And I mean, there's a lot of players this year that were going to leave the system. We obviously saw that in the minor league free agency, Carlos Mendoza going to Toronto. There's a lot of guys that have been there for a long time. Alfonso going to the Dodgers. And so I think these 5 guys represent, especially 2 of them with Cruz and Valencia, who have really big years, but they've been overshadowed by McGonigle, and rightfully so, because McGonigle is the top prospect. But Valencia and Trei Cruz really came into their own this year. And, you know, you look at what happened with Jake Miller being injured, and the Tigers, I think, wisely going, yeah, we're not going to pitch him in the Arizona Fall League. I thought that was really good because they don't really have anybody in AA and AAA right now that's going to be the next guy. And so that's going to step up and really be effective out of the bullpen. But even with Thayron's struggles he hasn't caught since July, there's still a big bat and there's still a lot of potential with that bat. So to me, they all made perfect sense.
You mentioned Trei Cruz. Let's get right into him. I want to touch on all these players, but Trei Cruz stands out to me as this guy's 27 years old, but he is a switch hitting shortstop / center fielder who also plays second base, third base, left field, and right field. He does it all defensively, also a switch hitter. He spent 69 games in AA Erie, then 58 games in AAA Toledo. At the AAA level, he hits .284 with 6 home runs, 48 walks, and 55 strikeouts in 58 games, posting an .881 OPS. 3rd round pick from the 2020 draft. Who is he? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What's the best case scenario upside? What's the floor? Trei Cruz, take it away.
You know, I think Trei Cruz is a guy because of his bloodlines, because, of course, his grandfather played for the Houston Astros, Jose, and then his father, who was at one point a Tiger coach for 30 seconds before going back to Rice. He's a guy who I saw his parents, I saw his grandparents even go to the games. He's a guy that comes with a high pedigree, so that's one of his strengths. High baseball IQ, really good base runner, smart baseball runner, plus defender. And he was a good defender that for a while when Gabe Alvarez was the manager at Erie, he was kind of had a hot dog reputation, but he worked on it and he became overnight one of the best defenders at center field and learning a new position. And there was a steady infielder in Erie, both on the shortstop and third base. He's a guy with improved contact rates over the last couple seasons. So I think that really stands out to me. Another strength is when he lifts the ball, he's got some really good sneaky power to him. And I think that's something that the Tigers recognize with him. The weakness, of course, the age a little bit, but I think also he was a guy who, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he played all 4 years at Rice, Chris. So he's a guy that is already kind of an older player as it stands. He has to prove the bat carries more against AAA velocity. I'd like to see more of a sample size with that a little bit. And the streakiness, I think that was a big part of it. But also, is he a guy that's going to be Zach McKinstry, but with power? I think that's where the best case scenario is. A high-end utility player that if the on-base percentage holds up, I think he could be a 2-WAR player. Honestly, I really think a 2 point, which sounds like this is not like a high WAR standard, but that's a pretty good player. That's a guy that can give you some quality at bats and doesn't hurt you defensively. And I think that's where his glove is really, to me, out of the last couple prospects we've seen in the last few years, his glove is, even after it came off I think it was Tommy John, where he had arm surgery and came back and it looked like he didn't miss a beat at all. It was impressive.
I will say one thing about Trei Cruz. He's from that 2020 draft class that includes Dingler and Torkelson and Colquitt and stuff. And one of the things, we try not to judge guys too much based on our first looks, but sometimes the first looks are right. You could ask Raj about his first look at Nick Quintana. So that first year, Trei Cruz hit like 160 in pro ball. with like a 22% walk rate or something like that. And I was just like, this dude can't hit. He's super passive. And to his credit, he's gotten better at hitting every single year until finally last year, he was one of the 4 or 5 best offensive players in the entire system. Now he was, like Rod said, he is a little bit older. And so I've always been a little bit skeptical of that hit tool because I couldn't shake that first season. But sometimes you got to give guys credit for getting out of it. And he did change the type of player he is. And when you look past that, everything else about him screams a Tigers player. Switch hitter, plays all over the field, gets on base, has a little bit of pop, has a little speed. So, and Roger's been talking about him adding him to the 40-man for a while, since before this last season even. And so, credit to him and credit to Trei Cruz for going out there and earning it.
Next player on the list is Hao-Yu Lee, 22-year-old, right-handed hitting second baseman / third baseman. He spent the entire season at AAA Toledo, hitting .243 with 14 home runs, 65 walks, and 121 strikeouts in 126 games, posting a .748 OPS. He is significantly better against left-handed pitchers, so much so that a platoon role is certainly going to be his role whenever he makes his MLB debut, I'd have to think. The Tigers acquired him from the Philadelphia Phillies in the 2023 Michael Lorenzen trade. Who is Hao-Yu Lee? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What's the best case scenario upside? And then what's the floor for him?
He's a bat first utility player. I mean, with really kind of compact mechanics, he's got gap power and he can play third base in a pinch. I think his strength is being consistent hard contact and having that really good ability to walk and draw walks have a good eye at the play essentially. And he plays second and third decent enough to where he's not going to be much of a liability. But the weakness is, it kind of plays in that a little bit. Limited defensive ceiling. So I think that if you're going to be a guy that you can put at third base long term, no, I don't think so. I think the power is capped because it was one of the things that Scott Harris mentioned during spring training. If you guys remember this too, about his swing mechanics, and he struck out when Harris was talking about that. And I still think that's a problem where he's overstriding at the plate, or I think they call it the bucket. And for whatever reason, also gets hit. I think it was like twice in 1 year he gets hit in the face a lot and uses this in terms of his health is a little bit worrisome. I think he's a platoon bat at this point because I just think that, I mean, he's still young for the level, young for AAA, but I'm concerned with as far as like his ceiling goes, he's a guy that on a team like, for example, the Las Vegas or the A's or whatever you want to call them, or the Rockies, he's a guy who's going to get quite a bit of bats and hit, but is he a guy who's going to be an all-star? I think he's just falls shy unless he works on his mechanic swings a little bit, because I think, like I said, sometimes it swings out of his shoe tops. And that it's similar to Riley Green in a sense. It's in the sense that is it going to be all power or not? But I think you look at a guy who the Tigers have the similar situation a little bit with Max Anderson a little bit, but I think he's going to be a utility. He can all second and third base guy, but a strong side platoon bat, really 270, 340, 420 kind of guy if everything lines up correctly.
And I also think he's probably athletic enough to move to the outfield if he ever has to. I think he's pretty good defender at second base, but the third base, for whatever reason, the throws seem to get him. One of the things that's interesting is if you look at his batted ball data from 2024 compared to 2025, it seemed like they made a concerted effort to get him to hit the ball to the opposite field more. It went from being 45% pull field to 40% opposite last year, and the results weren't as good. So I don't know if that was in early on, he really seemed to be struggling with velocity as a hitter, a particularly elevated velocity. So I don't know if that was part of, if the swing batted ball differences were because he can't hit velocity or because they altered his approach or what. But I still think there are the tools in there to possibly be an everyday regular somewhere, maybe a second division regular, a team that's not really a contender, but he needs to improve for sure. The good thing is he's still pretty young. So he's got time to figure it out.
Next on the list is Jake Miller, a 24-year-old left-handed starter with a history as a reliever, limited to 6 games due to a back injury, but he is expected to be healthy for spring training. In 4 starts for AA Erie, he posted a 2.12 ERA with 4 walks and 16 strikeouts across 20 innings. He was the Tigers' 8th round pick in the 2022 draft. Who is Jake Miller? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And what is the best case scenario upside for him? And what's the floor?
He's a guy with an uncomfortable angle. I mean, a plus slider who I think the strength is the slider is it can miss bats really well. He just got very good deception, hides the ball well when his wind up and he throws the plate. And he's got really good command. He's got good pinpoint command. Even with the AA strike zone in the limited time, he was able to adjust because Chris and I always joke about how weird the AA strike zone is because it's the most inconsistent thing. You you wish the ABS was there, but I digress. The weakness to me is a fastball is below average if the shape isn't perfect. So in other words, he has to really get that fastball command right. It's not a blow you away fastball. It's enough to get you grounders, but I think that's the problem. The lack of a third pitch, from what I can see, I think that you have to make that to the next level to me, a back end starter. And I think the other part of the weakness is going to be limited to a bullpen role long term. And I think the best case scenario for him is a multi-inning lefty weapon. But if he can get the velocity up there, if he can get the 96, 97 on a regular, or maybe a setup guy, if the velocity climbs in, he can team up that fastball with that slider, because I think his delivery is key. It makes it kind of reminds me of Jamie Walker, old Tiger reference there in a way that, except a little more velocity to him.
Yeah, man, I think you touched on just about everything there. The main thing that jumped out to me with Jake Miller was just the strikes. He threw so many strikes in 2024. It was like 130 strikeouts to 20 walks if you fold in the Arizona Fall League time. I think his changeup is okay. I think he can get by with it for now. It is kind of an interesting, it's almost like he gets by with deception more than velocity, right? The fastball is like 93. It'll get up to 95 occasionally. But when he is throwing it from the sort of slightly odd angle, batters don't seem to pick it up very well. But ultimately, you've got a guy with a couple pitches. He throws a lot of strikes, and he might be able to work as a reliever or a starter. And I think the Tigers could use both of those, honestly. So I think it made sense to add him.
Thayron Liranzo, 22-year-old switch hitting catcher. He spent the entire season at Double-A Erie, hitting just 206 with 11 home runs, 47 walks, and 125 strikeouts in 88 games, posting a .659 OPS. He flashed power against both right-handed and left-handed pitchers, but he has some serious strikeout problems. He recently fell off of the top 100 prospects list on MLB Pipeline, but he still ranks as MLB Pipeline's number 5 prospect in the Tigers farm system. Tigers acquired him from the Los Angeles Dodgers in the 2024 Jack Flaherty trade. Who is he? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And for Liranzo, what is the best case scenario upside? But then also, what's the floor?
He is a guy that has really 67 degree raw power. That's one of his strengths. And he does have very good patience for being a slugger and being that fits that mold. And he can hit the ball to all fields. And that's a big part of it. The weakness is the catching. I mean, we didn't see him catch again until after July. There's been problems with his attitude a little bit from what we heard and what we saw. So he can sometimes against lefties, his swing to me looks a little long. And as far as is he going to be a first baseman DH? We'd love to see him play first base. He hasn't even done that yet. And so right now he's been primarily a DH. He was a DH the last couple of months. So the lack of consistency, the weakness, is just the attitude. I mean, and Chris mentioned this too a couple times in the podcast. He did go through a lot last year. His father passed away, unfortunately, and he may have gone through a lot personally. So I think that plays a factor into perhaps his development a little bit. But I also don't see, in terms of catching wise, he did not make an adjustment. He did not get better as a catcher. If anything, I felt he regressed a little bit because of lack of getting reps. And that's why you saw Jose Briseño take so many reps. I think the best case scenario for him is a 30 home run guy in the middle of the order. If the contact rate holds up, even if he sticks to catcher, even part-time. But the problem is that if you look at how Hinch likes his catchers, AJ Hinch is a guy who loves defensive-minded catchers. And we saw that with Dingler. You see it with Jake Rogers right now. And I think that Liranzo falls a little bit short of it as of right now, unless, depending on where Brian Pena, who's going to be coming back to the minor league system this year, ends up at. If he ends up at Double-A and reunites with Liranzo because he worked with him at West Michigan, that could be something that helps his career get back going and put him back in top prospect status.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about the power with Liranzo, right? Switch hitter with tons of power from both sides. He's actually, I think, a better hitter from the right side, but, you don't get as many at-bats there. And I think, this gets said all the time. It's a cliche, but it's true that prospect development is not linear, right? And we notice this, particularly with catchers. Once they get to Double-A, they seem to hit a wall really hard. And you don't have to go back that far to look at Dylan Dingler's first taste of Double-A. He hit 202 with very little power and a 30% strikeout rate. And Liranzo's never going to be the defender that Dingler is, but he's got the tools to be a catcher at the big league level. I think he just needs to Rod's point, he needs to kind of redouble his effort on it and focus on it. And, it may take him another 600 at bats at Double-A before he figures out he needs to work on his swing. It's a little bit long and needs to figure that part out, but there's still that upside there. And I think it made sense to add him because if they didn't, the Rockies would have just scooped him up and let him hit 140 in the big leagues in 100 at bats this year while playing first base or whatever. And then, let him develop for another 3 years and maybe have something down the road.
Last but not least, Eduardo Valencia, 25 years old, right-handed hitting catcher / first baseman. He played 53 games for AA Erie and 50 games for AAA Toledo. He combined for a .311 batting average and 24 home runs in those 103 games between both levels. At the AAA level, he hit .319 with 13 home runs, 27 walks, and 41 strikeouts in 50 games, posting a 1.026 OPS. He came out of nowhere in 2025 after spending most of 2024 at Low A Lakeland. He was signed by the Tigers out of Venezuela as part of the 2018 international signing period. Who is Eduardo Valencia? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What's the best case scenario for this out of nowhere prospect? And then also, what's the floor?
As Troy Melton once said to me in the locker room after a game, that Edward Valencia is the Tigers' best hitting prospect. And he was serious. Melton raved about Valencia's ability to hit in the gap, and he was a real breakout threat. I mean, he right out of the gate in the Erie was a significant difference. He lost a little bit of weight, and he also worked on his swing mechanics, cleaning up a little bit to get his bat faster through the zone, because the biggest problem for him prior to that was he had kind of had a long swing, but he shortened up his swing, a little bit quicker swing. And I talked to Gabe Alvarez a little bit about it too. His bat speed's gotten significantly better. It was something he really worked on. His improved swing decisions was something else that stood out among the organization. Everybody loved, from every person that we talked about Valencia's work ethic and his improved ability at the plate. And as far as his defense goes, that's where the weakness comes in a little bit. He does need to work at first base. He did take first base quite a bit this year in Toledo, but still needs to work. Sometimes the swing path can get a little uphill, but the approach, I still think the approach can be a little bit inconsistent, but he's a guy who I'm not sure catcher will be his long-term position. I think he's a good athlete. He's a good framer. He's got a good arm, but as Alvarez said, he still needs to work on his back and forth a little bit, where he's blocking the ball a little bit better. Those things he can work on a little bit. And I think he's a guy who I really think could be a 20 home run guy for the Tigers, as far as if he can get enough at bats, enough ability to stay on base ability. He doesn't make a lot of bad swing decisions too, and I think that's a big thing of it. But the reason why Valencia had such a breakout year, and this is just exactly what Chris was talking about, prospect development is not linear. And I think with Valencia, the fact that the weight loss and everything I just mentioned, but also here's the thing about him being a catcher too. You have Brieske, you have all these guys are above him, and I think that the extra work paid off, and so be able to get back and into better shape, but also look at a lot of tape too, a lot of video he looked at, and he was really trying to refine his game a little bit. And so that is the reason why Eduardo Valencia came out of nowhere. And I think that he's going to be a guy who I think is going to make turn some heads in spring training. I really believe that.
Yeah, he's a heck of a fun story. Like, this is one of the cooler things to when you cover the minors and see guys like this, where, we assume he'd be a backup at AA, because he's been a backup his entire professional career for the most part, which is like, okay, he's just an org catcher. And then he just started hitting for power, and it didn't stop. It was kind of reminiscent of what Kerry Carpenter did a few years back. Carpenter was hitting a home run like every 12 at bats. Valencia was more like every 16 at bats. It's still pretty damn good. And then you look at it, okay, well, he's a little bit older. He's been in the system for a long time, but he really hasn't played a ton. I think he had about 1,000 career at bats before this past season, and he got 400 this year or something like that. So, age-wise, he might be a little bit older, but he might still have some development to do. And as Rod mentioned, there's some work on the defensive side, but his year was so good with the bat that it made sense to at least give him a look, right? Like, you don't want to lose this guy, and he turns out to be Kerry Carpenter from the right side, and you go, whoops, we didn't keep him. I'm not predicting that's going to happen, but he's another guy like Cruz that made it a tough choice and made them add him. And so I'm really interested to see what kind of future he has.
Just as a reminder for those who do not know, the Rule 5 draft, the way that it works is teams have to protect certain players. And if players are left unprotected, then one of the other 29 teams could poach him in the Rule 5 draft. But when a player is selected in the Rule 5 draft, to stay in that new team's organization, they have to stay on the active roster or the injured list for the entire season. So if the Tigers would have left Hao-Yu Lee unprotected, and let's say a different team would have picked him up, then Hao-Yu Lee would have had to stay on that new team's active roster for the entire 2026 season. Now, the Tigers protected Hao-Yu Lee, and Thayron Liranzo. Those were the locks to be protected. The other three players protected, Trei Cruz, Jake Miller, Eduardo Valencia, those three were not locks to be protected, but the Tigers went and protected them anyway. Of those three players, what name surprised you the most? And what player do you think will have the best career in the big leagues? From those three, Trei Cruz, Jake Miller, Eduardo Valencia.
I was surprised I'll say this, even with the Tigers being kind of their pitching depth right now, this was a tough one. Like, I really thought about Jake Miller, but at the end, I went with really Trei Cruz because they have a guy like that in Zach McKinstry, a super utility player. And I really thought that I wanted Trei Cruz, and that was my own personal thing, but I thought the Tigers would think differently because perhaps they have with McKinstry, they have a couple guys that can do what Cruz already does. That being said, I just say that because the amount of pedigree that goes with Cruz and everything, I thought maybe perhaps the Tigers would give him an opportunity elsewhere, maybe trade him and or add him, or something to that effect before the season went out. And I'm glad that smarter heads prevailed with that. And I give it slightly over the edge because Miller, to me, the Tigers' pitching depth is so shallow at the moment, honestly, to be perfectly blunt. The upside is more of a reliever than a starter. And I think you have guys like Brant Herter. The Tigers have been able to develop lefties a little bit to a certain extent. But I was just so shocked by Trei Cruz because I really thought that the Tigers would let him walk.
Cruz is the one that shocked me the most, too. And it's nothing against him, but it's just looking at the way the organization has treated him over the last several years. And I don't mean like treated him poorly or anything like that, but he spent parts of 4 seasons in Double-A. Like, I thought if they found him to be a viable big leaguer, they would have brought him up to Triple-A sooner, or maybe have given him a look down the stretch this year to see if they, had something. But yeah, I guess they just looked at it and thought that, hey, this is a quality player we can use. And so good for him. But yeah, none of them were like giant shocks, but I was mildly surprised by Valencia and Cruz the most though.
Yeah. I mean, and one thing I want to add to that too, Chris, the biggest thing about Trei Cruz is he was one of the last guys that come up to AAA. I mean, if you look at those guys from that 2020 draft class, there was a whole group of guys, Magno, who's now a free agent. There's a bunch of those guys that were just in Erie for that long. I mean, basically, Cruz got bought a house in Erie at this point, and that's how long he was there for. And so those 2 Seawolf back-to-back title was basically Double-A veterans. I mean, let's not kid ourselves here a little bit. And a guy like Cruz, I think, would have made a difference this year. He would have stayed around. But I'm glad the Tigers gave him a challenge because he, quite frankly, didn't need to be in Erie anymore. He didn't need to be in Erie late last year. I thought it was a waste of time for him being there this year, quite frankly. And I'm glad that the Tigers wised up and put him in AAA.
As for the players the Tigers did not protect, players who could be picked up by different organizations in the Rule 5 draft, is there any player the Tigers will regret not protecting? Some names that come to mind to me: right-handed reliever RJ Pettit, third baseman Isaac Pacheco, maybe right-hander Troy Watson, who will make $1.3 million when he's in the big leagues, according to his minor league contract. Anyone else? Like, do you think the Tigers should be worried about losing Isaac Pacheco in the Rule 5 draft, or is it too soon for him? RJ Pettit, is that somebody who could be picked up elsewhere? Troy Watson? Any other names? What are your thoughts?
So I know Jason Beck would love, him and I love some RJ Pettit, and we've talked about this numerous times. I think Pettit's going to be a guy that he throws in the upper 90s. And it's again, as Chris has said 1,000 times, how the organization treats you is based on where you are in the level. He was in Double-A forever, got to AAA, was effective, but then he didn't even get a consideration for the Tigers to be, for how many bullpen arms they needed for a guy that can throw in the upper 90s. They saw something else with their, we're not satisfied with him. Maybe more swing and miss stuff, even though his K per nine was pretty good. I don't know. I think he might be a guy that they regret a little bit. Troy Watson, I think between him and Pettit, I think it's going to be Watson. And here's why. I think Watson last year gained 4 miles per hour. I mean, he gained quite a bit of velocity last year. When he picked up by originally last year from Toronto, and his numbers in Buffalo, they're terrible. Then we saw on Twitter he was in down in Oklahoma where the Tigers used those. I forgot the name of the school that's down there they're using, and Watson was down there, and his numbers were night and day, comparatively speaking. And one of our writers, Colin, did a really good job interviewing him, and he made that adjustment to the difference in the ball in Double-A to AAA, where you're using a Major League Baseball. And he adjusted that just fine. And he was making that adjustment before. And I think Watson's a guy who fits what the Tigers are looking for right now, which is a guy that throws velocity, can throw strikes. Just give him an opportunity. I'd love to see Troy Watson make this team out of spring training, because the Tigers are going to try to look eternal. We know we know they're going to address pitching in the spring, in the free agency. I use that quotations because we know they're going to turn the soil over and over to find some guys eternally. But I think if Watson's not I think Watson or Pettit, but I'm going to give the slight edge to Watson because I think he's a guy who he could also start too. And he has that starter experience as well.
I do wonder, they added 5 guys this year. I wonder if part of that was informed by losing Gage Workman and Liam Hicks last year. And, they got Workman back or whatever, but I don't think they would have traded for Hicks and then not protected him if they thought he was going to get taken. Like, I feel like, they were caught a little off guard there. And so I think they protected all these guys just in case. Pettit, I could see Pettit being a big leaguer for sure. I do. I don't know if he does anything above and beyond any of the other relievers that they have floating around. And so they might just feel like, he's not to be demeaning, but maybe he's a dime a dozen type reliever, right? Like it's the guy you could find. Beyond that, generally speaking, I don't worry about guys below AA. Pacheco has a lot of power that might intrigue somebody, but he would probably get destroyed by big league pitching. If there's any maybe Peyton Graham is kind of like a weird dark horse Gage Workman type who maybe somebody, he's the 2nd round pick. Maybe somebody else really liked him like that and wants a chance at him. But I don't think they're going to lose. If they lose anybody, it'll probably be Pettit. And beyond that, I don't know. It'll be kind of shocking if somebody else gets taken, at least in the big league portion of the Rule 5 draft. We don't need to get into the minor league portion of the Rule 5 draft.
And I think Pacheco's not been tested at AA at all. And that says something. I mean, I think he had a really good year at West Michigan. He's the all-time leader in home runs. And that's a record that some of those guys don't really like taking with pride if you really ask them deep down inside. But I think he's a guy who still needs a lot of polish and needs a lot of work. And AA is really where you get your merit. And if a team decided to stash him for a year, I'd be shocked. There's a lot of other guys in this Rule 5 draft that can definitely be picked up, but I'm not worried about Pacheco being picked up at all.
All right, Raj, before we get you out of here, let's ask the question that everybody wants to know. Kevin McGonigle, when do you think he will make his MLB debut in the 2026 season? Because we know he's going to debut in 2026 as long as he stays healthy. But the question is when?
So prior to the championship game again, or prior to the championship series against Binghamton, I would have said spring training. But then after watching that series with Chris, and then we were sitting there watching, and Chris pointed this out astutely, he was rolling the ball over a lot to the right-hand side, and he really struggled against velocity and sliders a little bit. And during that whole series, even in the Altoona series, rather, too, against Connor Griffin, that was the better shortstop. I mean, you talk about the 2 best shortstops in all the minor leagues, and Connor Griffin was hands down far and away better athlete. He made some really good plays defensively with his glove. He had a good series of working at bats better than McGonigle. And I'm not saying anything bad about McGonigle. I know he is the AFL MVP. I get that. But we've talked about this times. Their AFL this year in terms of pitching was not what it was. That being said, I think McGonigle has a good shot to make the team out of the spring, but I think he's going to be there probably by late May, early June. If he gets off to a really good start in Toledo, I still think he's going to spend a month or 2 in Toledo. The Tigers are very stingy, very steadfast about making sure that Toledo is the last stop. And we haven't seen a guy who's made the team out of AA or out of AA in, was it been like 5 or 6 years, Chris? Something to that effect. And so I just don't see, even with whatever situation, whether free agent, however they address their things in free agency, I just don't see McGonigle making the team out of spring training. I really don't.
Kevin McGonigle is the biggest storyline, but for Raj, for Chris, what are some of the biggest minor league storylines that you're going to be watching in the 2026 season aside from McGonigle?
We're nerds for this. We love the young guys, getting a chance to see them play. So I want to see Bryce Rader come back healthy. I want to see that arm strength. I want to see him become a top 10 prospect in baseball because I think he has that talent. I'd like to see these the kids they drafted, because they were really kind of not necessarily off the board, but the Tigers reached for guys, at least according to the public draft rankings. And I want to see, I kind of tend to trust their hitting evaluation, but I want to see if they've done it again. And they took a bunch of interesting arms in this draft too. So I want to see some of those guys, but yeah, mostly these young guys that people haven't heard of. I want to see Yonan Koba come to the Gulf Coast League or Florida Complex League and light it up. I want to see Kelvin Salcedo continue to look like the best starting pitcher in the system. So yeah, don't get me started on the nerdy stuff down lower levels.
Well, I was going to let you do that because, I mean, Kelvin Salcedo is a guy who you were one of the first guys to be very high on, and watching him and his fastball and curveball play up, he is a guy who I didn't want to do the Rainer Castillo syndrome, where we saw Rainer Castillo regress in West Michigan. So I think Salcedo might be a little different, and he's kind of a beefy guy, and I think he's going to continue to get better. One story that I think that we should be talking about more too, or not talk. Well, I think it's going to be a story next year is what to do with Garrett Burhan and just let him go to the bullpen. I think Garrett Burhan is a guy I think he's going to be his last. He's one of the guys that he's older and Erie. I think he's not a starter. He's starting to lose velocity a little bit. Let him air it out in Erie because a bullpen. He's a guy, a really good slider when it's on. And I think he's a guy who can only go 1 or 2 innings now at this point. But the pitching is, and I would agree with Chris. Well, I want to see what the guys they drafted do. I like to see at some point, I don't know, Ethan Shufflebom pitch. That would be nice. I mean, there's this weird, mysterious thing about some of these guys just went to the Tigers' backfields and like the field of dreams that just disappeared. We never heard from again. And it was really weird. And Evan, I know that you're a type of guy that has a lot of questions when it comes to these things. I wish I had better answers for you, but I don't because no one tells us anything. And we just hear things and we see things. And I think the Tigers pitching right now, heading to 2026 is a big question mark in the minor leagues because they have had a lot of injuries. As Chris did a really good article about this, that's something to point out. Some people think you shouldn't be alarmed by it. I am alarmed by it because, quite frankly, what do you have in AA and AAA right now that's your next Troy Melton right now? You can't think of anybody right now. Off the top of your head right now, there's not a guy that stands out that, maybe Jaden, you were going to say Jaden Ham. Oh, no, wait. He went 88, 89. He lost velocity last year after his injury. You hope that he comes back and can throw and be a guy that can be in the top 10 prospect development again. But I'm also, we're talking about Micaiah Witherspoon, and you should be excited for him. But at the same time, we haven't seen him throw yet, and he might be the Tigers' best pitching prospect. And he hasn't thrown an inning yet. That's how weird the system is right now in terms of pitching. And that is a concern to me. And that should be a concern to anybody else.
Ethan Schiefelbein, Owen Hall, where are they? Nobody knows. All right, Raj, thank you for joining us to share your insights about the 5 players the Tigers protected from the Rule 5 draft by adding them to the 40-man roster, along with other topics about the farm system. Thank you for joining the Days of Roar podcast.
You're welcome, gentlemen.
Everyone, that was Rogelio Castillo from Tigers Minor League Report. We have more to discuss this week, including players to bring back on minor league contracts. But first, let's take a break. All right, let's talk about Andy Ibáñez. The Tigers non-tendered him, and I completely understand why. You go back to July of the 2024 season. That was the last time that he was really elite in his role as a right-handed hitter against left-handed pitchers. Ever since then, post-July 2024, Andy Ibáñez really struggled, had a lot of ups and downs, got sent to AAA Toledo, and it just ended up not being a really good situation for Ibáñez and the Tigers. So I understand why the Tigers parted ways with Andy Ibáñez by non-tendering him into free agency. But there's a problem. The Tigers have DH-only type right-handed hitters who crush left-handed pitchers. 2 of them, actually. Jahmai Jones and Justin Henry Malloy. Those guys can't play defense. So what happens when you need a pinch hitter for Colt Keith or Zach McKinstry? Where is Jahmai Jones playing in the infield? Where is Justin Henry Malloy playing in the infield? Like those guys, they're not even trusted in the outfield. So there's no way they're going to play in the infield. That tells me the Tigers need a right-handed hitter who crushes left-handed pitchers and is capable of playing above average defense at multiple infield positions. Who's the replacement for Andy Ibáñez? Or do they not need one? Is there a different solution that you have in mind? Is it like a Javi Baez play everywhere type of a situation? Well, then the question becomes who starts at shortstop if it's not Kevin McGonigle. Well, then who's it going to be? It just seems like the Tigers, if they were going to part ways with Andy Ibáñez, they probably need an Andy Ibáñez replacement.
Yeah, the defensive aspect of it is interesting because, as a specialist in hitting left-handed pitching, that's one of the more perilous job in professional baseball. Like, as we saw, you have a down season, you only have about 80 plate appearances to 100 plate appearances to really prove yourself. And it didn't work out, and Jahmai Jones stepped in and really crushed it. So I think from the hitting perspective, Jones seems like the guy who's going to step in there. You could have Vierling step in a little bit. He's not a great third baseman. I think he's worked out at second base. I don't think he's ever actually played there. But those are right-handed bat options. And then you have a couple of guys. You got Hao-Yu Lee, who you just added to the 40-man roster, who can play third base. He's better at second base. He had a 920 OPS against left-handed pitching in AAA this year. You got Trei Cruz. Trei Cruz can play third. He can play second. He's better as a left-handed hitter, but he can. He's a switch hitter. He'll switch hit from the right side. And then you could, if you really want to, you could reach down and grab Max Anderson, another guy who's not great defensively at third or second, but he had like a 120 or over 1,000 OPS against left-handed pitching this year. So they have some bats that are mildly, interesting there. I just don't know if there's a clear 1-to-1 replacement for Ibáñez.
I really like, in terms of a 1-to-1 replacement, I really like Amed Rosario, who's a free agent, and he projects for like a 1-year, $3 million contract. So he's cheap, and he does everything that you would need him to do. In 2025, he hit .302 with an .819 OPS against lefties. He's a long-time shortstop, can still play there. He also has experience at, bear with me, second base, third base, left field, right field, center field. Like, he can play everywhere on the diamond that's not first base. I think he is the perfect fit if the Tigers want someone who can pinch hit against a left-handed reliever and then play anywhere other than first base on defense to help you win a game. Because not only if you're pinch hitting late in the game, it's because you got to score runs. And if you got to score runs, you got to prevent runs as well, especially in the 8th and the 9th inning. So I think Amed Rosario could be a guy that could get that job done, especially on the cheap. And then if you need to part ways with him later on, no big deal. It's only 1 year, $3 million. Like, that's what he projects for. He's played for the Dodgers a couple of times in his career, especially recently. That's a really good sign to me. When the Dodgers want a player and he's cheap and he does things really well, like play above average defense all over the place, hit against left-handed pitchers, I'm all in on Amed Rosario. You can sign me up as the 1-to-1 replacement for Andy Ibáñez. The Tigers entered the offseason with 15 arbitration-eligible players, and then they got the number down to 12 before the tender deadline by designating Alex Lange, Tanner Rainey, and Jason Foley for assignment. The Tigers also non-tendered these 4 pre-arbitration players: Dugan Darnell, friend of the podcast, Jack Little, Tyler Madison, and Sean Gunther. Alex Lange signed a 1-year contract with the Kansas City Royals, and he remains under team control through the 2028 season. So the Tigers are not bringing back Alex Lange, but among the other non-tenders, who do you want back the most on a minor league contract? 3 names come to mind to me: Jason Foley, Tyler Madison, Sean Gunther. Who do you want back the most?
If Foley were healthy, he seemed like he would be the obvious choice, but I'm pretty skeptical that he's healthy. If they went and paid Beau Brieske. Foley was a more integral part of the bullpen. I don't think he was that much more expensive either, but that was a shoulder injury. And every now and then those just end careers. And I hope that's not the case, but I'm worried that might be the case. Sean Gunther was interesting, but I always felt like smoke and mirrors with him, even when he was getting the job done in 2024. I wouldn't hate having him back at all, right? You always need more lefty relievers. We saw that down the stretch in 2025. So I'd be fine with him back. And Tyler Madison, as a prospect guy, he was a guy that I liked for many years as a prospect. He has some interesting stuff, ton of ride on his fastball, a couple interesting secondary pitches, but he hasn't had a whole lot of success since he came back from injury. But he's the sort of guy that I would give another shot to, right? You re-sign him to a minor league deal or whatever and see if you can unlock it fully at some point. But none of those guys are screaming, bring me back to me. It would be nice to, as you said, bring back our friend of the podcast, Dugan Darnell and Jack Little. I assume those guys are all going to come back, but we'll see.
I think the Tigers need to bring back Tyler Madison on a minor league contract. I really like him. Maybe you can tell me otherwise, but this guy is 26 years old, right-handed reliever. He returned from Tommy John surgery in late May after missing the entire 2024 season. So he's fresh off of TJ. He pitched 39 innings this season, including 19 innings of AAA Toledo. Fastball average 94 miles an hour, 30% whiff rate, also throws a slider and a changeup. The fastball is legit. I think Tyler Madison could be a key piece of the Tigers bullpen in 2026, but he has to cut down on the walks. The walks continue to be a problem for him, but I think the upside is tremendous. And the Tigers added him to the 40-man roster last offseason around this time to protect him from the Rule 5 draft for a reason. I think they need to keep him in the organization. They were even talking before the trade deadline about Tyler Madison potentially being an answer for them down the stretch and into the postseason. Now, obviously, it didn't work out. He didn't throw strikes like he needed to. The walks, they really are an issue. But I think there's enough upside there where they really should prioritize bringing Tyler Madison back. Do you think there's any hope for him? Or do you think that the combination of the Tommy John surgery, the walks, is that a bad arrest? Is that a recipe for a disaster, I guess?
No, I think there's some hope for him. I paid a lot of attention to his outings as the season went along because, when he came back, the velocity wasn't quite there, but he was getting there toward the end of the year. He was touching 95, 96 fairly regularly. And there's a talent there. Before he was injured, we had Gabe Alvarez, the then manager of the Erie Seawolves, who's now with the Toledo Mud Hens, comparing with James Karinchak. If people might remember him as a kind of late inning reliever for Cleveland in the early 2020s, who had, and actually went to the same school, so there may be some comparisons there. that might be, but the same sort of over the top delivery, fastball with a lot of ride, downer curveball. It's interesting stuff. And he's the sort of guy I would not let get away if it doesn't cost too much, right? Like it's just a minor league deal. And I think they may have done the thing where you can non-tender him and just claim him right back. So I would definitely like to see him back because he is a guy that he's always been on our prospect list, even when he was hurt, because we thought there was potential to work in the late innings in the big league. And I still think it's there.
All right, let's get out of here. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone out there. And a thanks from Days of Roar to Chris Brown for always co-hosting with me here. Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone out there for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Please drop us a rating and comment what you think about the show. Say all kinds of good things about Chris. Stick with freep.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I'd like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, and our magical producer, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.